20 reasons. We're glad we grew up in the 1970s. Think the 70s were just disco and bell-bottoms? Think again. From pet rocks to shag carpets, Saturday cartoons to late-night laughs, growing up in this wild decade was a one-of-a-kind adventure. Curious why it was the best time to be a kid? Let's jump into 20 unforgettable reasons the 70s ruled our childhood. We were allowed outside without parental supervision. Back in the 70s, being a kid meant having a kind of freedom that's almost unheard of now. Whether you lived in a busy city or out in the country, most days started with a simple instruction. Be home by dinner. That was it. No check-ins, no texts, and definitely no parents following close behind. You just stepped outside and let the day take you wherever it wanted. Sidewalks, backyards, and neighborhood parks were our kingdom. With no one hovering over us, we learned to make our own rules, settle our own arguments, and chase our own adventures. We'd ride our bikes for miles, build forts out of anything we could find, and gather a group for a game of tag or kickball. That kind of freedom gave us more than just fun. It gave us confidence. We learned how to explore, make choices, and figure things out on our own. Looking back, it felt like a golden age of growing up. The world felt bigger, our imaginations felt endless, and every day was a new chance to make it all up as we went. Hi everyone, it's me from Past Not Past, and I've got a quick update. This channel's having some tech issues, so we'll only post here once or twice a week. But good news, we've launched a brand new channel where we're now uploading 1 to 3 videos every day, full of the same nostalgic stories you love. Check out the link below, hit subscribe, and let's keep the memories alive together. And riding your bike didn't require extra equipment. In the 70s, hopping on your bike meant one thing: freedom. No helmets, no pads, just you and the open road. Safety gear? That wasn't even a thought. If someone showed up wearing a helmet, they'd probably get laughed at. It was almost like admitting you didn't belong in the wild world of two-wheel stunts and neighborhood races. We flew down streets, tore through dirt paths, and launched off homemade ramps like little daredevils chasing Evel Knievel's shadow. We didn't slow down, and we definitely didn't worry. Crashes were expected. Spills, bruises, and even the occasional knock on the head came with the territory. But to us, that was part of the ride. Those scrapes and scabs? They weren't injuries, they were trophies. Proof that you'd gone fast, taken risks, and lived to tell the tale. Back then, biking wasn't about being careful. It was about pushing limits, feeling the wind in your face, and tasting pure, unfiltered freedom. Music came in vinyl, cassette, and 8-track. Back in the 70s, how we listened to music was just as important as the music itself. We had vinyl records, cassette tapes, and 8 tracks, each one bringing something special to the table. Vinyl was the standout, known for its rich, crisp sound. Playing a record felt like a ritual. You'd gently pull it from the sleeve, place it on the turntable, drop the needle, and let those warm sounds fill the room. The album art? That was a bonus. Big, bold, and often just as memorable as the songs inside. Cassettes made music more personal and portable. They were small, easy to pack, and ideal for long drives or just hanging out with your tape deck or boombox. And who could forget 8 tracks? Sure, they were bulky and a bit awkward, but they had their charm. Their ability to play music in a continuous loop was cutting edge at the time. Even if they didn't stick around as long, 8 tracks showed just how far folks were willing to go to push music tech forward. School lunches had a flexible definition of healthy. Back in the 70s, calling school lunches healthy was a bit of a stretch. Just look at a 1974 Texas school menu and you'll see what we mean. The so-called nutritious meals featured heavy hitters like chili burgers, classic hamburgers, oven-fried chicken, buttered corn, and of course, that jiggly fruit gelatin. By today's standards, not exactly a balanced plate, but back then, it was more about feeding growing kids without breaking the bank. Nutrition wasn't the top priority. What mattered was taste and making sure those trays were piled high. Honestly, with all those carbs, it's amazing we made it through the afternoon without dozing off. Still, those lunches had a cozy kind of charm. The buttery corn paired with crunchy chicken and that colorful blob of gelatin bouncing on the tray. Somehow, it all worked. It wasn't the healthiest way to fuel our day, but it sure added a little joy and flavor to our school routine. The world felt more safe and secure because of Fred Rogers. In the 1970s, the world felt a bit gentler, and a big reason for that was Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood wasn't just another kid's show. It was a source of comfort that wrapped around us like a blanket. The theme song, "Won't You Be My Neighbor," wasn't just a tune. It felt like a personal invitation, letting us know we were welcome and safe. Fred Rogers had this special way of speaking straight to us. His soft tone, gentle smile, and thoughtful words made us feel calm and cared for. When you were scared, confused, or just trying to understand the world, he was like a steady hand to hold. He didn't shy away from tough subjects, but he made them feel okay to talk about. There was nothing flashy about his lessons, but they stuck. He showed us how to be kind, how to care for others, and how to feel good about being ourselves. In a time without constant noise or distractions, Fred Rogers gave us a quiet corner of the world where we mattered. And that feeling that we were seen and safe is why he's still remembered as a symbol of trust and love. What's your favorite 70s memory that still makes you smile today? We experienced Star Wars for the first time with zero expectations. In 1977, seeing Star Wars for the first time was like stepping into the unknown, and that's what made it so magical. We had no idea what we were walking into. No trailers on loop, no social media buzz, no older sibling whispering spoilers. Names like Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader meant nothing to us yet. We just sat down in the theater, unaware that we were about to witness history. From the very first moment, the crawl of yellow text, the massive Star Destroyer rumbling overhead, and that first lightsaber duel, we were hooked. It was fresh, thrilling, and totally unexpected. We weren't following some guide or chasing iconic scenes. Everything hit us in real time, and it felt personal, like we were part of something brand new. Star Wars wasn't just another movie. It was a moment that brought us together, fired up our imaginations, and left us dreaming about galaxies far, far away. For our generation, it was more than entertainment. It was a cultural lightning bolt we all got struck by at once. We'd head to the video arcade with a pocket full of quarters. In the 70s, if you had a handful of quarters and a free Saturday, the arcade was the place to be. It wasn't like today where you can fire up Pac-Man or Fortnite with a click. Nope, back then, playing meant making an effort and parting with your hard-earned allowance. Each round cost a quarter, so every second at the joystick counted. One wrong move and you were out of luck unless you had more change. Just getting there was part of the fun. We'd hoard our coins all week, waiting for that magic moment when our parents finally gave us the green light. Walking into the arcade felt like entering another dimension. The flashing lights, the blaring sound effects, and the excitement of chasing the top score, it was pure magic. Learning the bump was the only dance move necessary. Back in the 70s, if you knew how to do the bump, you were all set for the dance floor. You didn't need a bunch of fancy moves, just a little rhythm and the right attitude. It was all about bumping hips with your partner, back and forth, like you owned the place. It was super easy to learn, and once you got the hang of it, you were in sync with everyone around you. What made the bump stick in our memories was the vibe it brought. It had a playful edge, maybe even pushed the envelope a bit for the times, but it was all in good fun. As soon as KC and the Sunshine Band's Shake, 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 Shake Your Booty started playing, the whole room would light up. You didn't need to think too much, just feel the beat and let loose. It was that kind of dance you could keep going all night long, and we usually did. A private phone call depended on the length of your rotary phone cord. Back in the 70s, having a private phone call wasn't easy. It was more like a challenge involving strategy and a really long rotary phone cord. There were no cell phones, so every conversation started on the house phone, usually mounted on the wall. And more often than not, that wall was smack in the middle of the kitchen, the most crowded spot in the house. So if you wanted to talk without the whole family listening in, you had to get creative. The mission? Stretch that cord to its absolute limit. Could you sneak it into the next room? Maybe duck around a corner? If you were lucky, you could make it into the hallway or even shut yourself in a closet. Everything depended on how far that curly cord would go and how quietly you could pull it without anyone noticing. If the cord came up short, you had no choice but to whisper or carefully tiptoe around your words. It was a dance of stealth and flexibility, all for just a sliver of privacy. Bowl cuts were considered fashionable. In the 70s, the bowl cut ruled the playground, and it wasn't just for the fashion-forward kids. It felt like every kid had it. Inspired by Adam Rich, who played Little Nicholas on 8 is Enough, this haircut became the gold standard for cute and wholesome. Whether you were growing up in the suburbs or deep in the city, chances are you rocked the same look. Your hair trimmed in a perfect circle like someone used a salad bowl as a guide. It was basic, sure, but there was something lovable about it. Getting a bowl cut felt like a childhood milestone. Even if your mom cut it in the kitchen with dull scissors, you walked away feeling like a mini celebrity. Rich or poor, it didn't matter. This was the go-to look for kids across the board. Looking back now, we might laugh at those photos, wondering what we were thinking. But back then, we felt sharp. That bowl cut wasn't just a hairstyle, it was a moment, a memory, and a shared piece of 70s style that we'll never forget. Before we dive into the next content, be honest. Did you ever rock a bowl cut, bell bottoms, or both? Shag carpeting made the best bed in history. There's a special kind of comfort that only 70s kids remember. The feeling of sinking into shag carpet. That thick, cozy texture didn't just cover the floor, it invited you in. It felt like the carpet was giving you a soft hug every time you sat or laid down on it. Whether you were unwinding after school or just hanging out, that shaggy surface became your go-to spot to stretch out and relax. And who could forget doing snow angels in the carpet? You'd wave your arms and legs just like in the snow, and the long fibers would hold the shape, leaving behind your own little design. It was silly, it was fun, and it made you feel right at home. That shag carpet wasn't just part of the decor, it was part of daily life. A bed for your naps, a stage for your games, a cushion for your daydreams. Just laying there, feeling the softness around you, brought a kind of peace we still remember. It wasn't fancy, but it made home feel like the coziest place in the world. Saturday mornings were reserved for cartoons. Saturday mornings in the 70s were something truly special. If you wanted cartoons, there was one shot. Saturday morning, and that was it. You had to be parked in front of the TV at just the right time. No streaming, no replays, no second chances. If you slept in or got distracted, tough luck. And honestly, that made it even better. All week long, you'd look forward to that moment. When Saturday finally rolled around, you'd grab your favorite cereal, plop down in your pajamas, and get lost in the world of Bugs Bunny, Scooby-Doo, and all your animated favorites. Every second mattered. There was no zoning out, no channel surfing. You were locked in, soaking up every joke and every chase scene. It wasn't just about watching cartoons, it was a weekly ritual. A time carved out just for you, filled with laughter, color, and imagination. And that feeling? It's something today's on-demand world just can't quite recreate. Tiger Beat was the only news we needed. In the 70s, Tiger Beat wasn't just a magazine. It was a ticket into our dream world. Teen idols like Shawn Cassidy and David Cassidy weren't just celebrities. They were everything. The stories? probably cooked up by publicists to keep that dream alive. But we didn't mind. We loved every bit of it. We wanted the glitz, the romance, the idea that these perfect, dreamy stars were out there living magical lives. We didn't care about the serious stuff grown-ups were into. Politics, world news, that all felt a million miles away. What we wanted was right there in those glossy pages. Fun gossip, heartthrob posters, and interviews that felt like secret messages from the stars themselves. Tiger Beat gave us what we craved: fantasy, escape, and the joy of being swept up in pop culture. It wasn't about truth, it was about the thrill. And for us, that was more than enough. It was possible to open junk mail without worrying about viruses. Back in the 70s, getting junk mail wasn't a threat, it was more of a mild annoyance. The worst surprise inside an envelope from someone you didn't know? Probably a chain letter. You know, those goofy notes asking you to copy it and send it to a bunch of friends or risk some weird bad luck. Unless you were the superstitious type, it usually went straight to the trash without a second glance. There was no worry about viruses hiding in the envelope or hackers stealing your info. It was just plain old paper, maybe with some flashy logos or catchy phrases trying to grab your eye. Opening the mail was about curiosity, not caution. The biggest risk? Feeling guilty about not passing on a silly letter or getting pulled into a sweepstakes you didn't even want to join. Simpler times for sure, and way less stressful than today's digital headaches. Long road trips happened in the back of your family's station wagon. Road trips in the 70s were a whole different kind of adventure. There were no gadgets to keep us entertained, no GPS to tell us where to go, and definitely no phones, tablets, or screens to distract us. It was just us, our family, and the trusty old station wagon, packed to the brim and ready to hit the road. The drives could go on forever. 8 hours, 10 hours, maybe more. And with nothing digital to turn to, we had to use our imagination. We'd play games like I Spy or try to count how many blue cars we saw. Sometimes we'd make up stories about the people in passing cars or fight over who got the window seat. But as the trip dragged on, something kind of peaceful would happen. We'd just stare out the window, watching the scenery roll by. The hum of the tires, the rhythm of the road, it was like a lullaby. It didn't matter where we were going. The ride itself became part of the fun. What's one thing from the 70s you wish would make a comeback? Rocks counted as pets. In the 70s, our idea of a pet got pretty wild. Some of us actually had pet rocks. Not as decorations, not as paperweights, but as real, named pets. We'd carry them around, give them little personalities, and act like they were just as lovable as a dog or a cat. They didn't cuddle or fetch, but we didn't care. To us, they were part of the crew. And here's the kicker. We paid real money for them. You could find pet rocks for sale in stores and from street vendors, even though rocks were literally everywhere. You could find one in your yard or on the sidewalk for free, but that wasn't the point. What made it special was the feeling that this one rock was yours. It was unique, it was fun, and it sparked our imaginations. Owning a pet rock wasn't about logic. It was about the joy of being a little weird, a little creative, and a lot proud of the simplest pet you could ever have. We learned everything we needed to know from Schoolhouse Rock. Schoolhouse Rock was the best kind of learning tool for us 70s kids. It taught us without ever feeling like school. It covered everything from grammar and math to science and civics, all wrapped up in bright cartoons and toe-tapping songs. You didn't even realize you were learning. It just felt like fun. One minute you were watching Saturday morning cartoons, the next you were humming facts about how a bill becomes a law. And come on, conjunction junction, what's your function? We can still belt that out today, word for word. That's the kind of magic Schoolhouse Rock had. It made boring subjects come alive in a way books and teachers never could. The song stuck with you long after the show ended, and by the time you were back in class, you already knew the lesson. It was smart, it was fun, and honestly, it might have been the sneakiest, most brilliant way we ever learned anything as kids. We'd stay up late just to watch Saturday Night Live. In the late 70s, Saturday Night Live wasn't just a show, it was the holy grail of late-night cool. For us kids, it was this mysterious, grown-up world we weren't quite allowed into. While we were used to cartoons and kid-friendly sitcoms, SNL was wild, edgy, and totally off-limits. That made it all the more exciting. Catching even a few minutes felt like breaking the rules. You'd stay up way past your bedtime, maybe sneak into the living room hoping no one would notice. Parents didn't get the hype, but we did. Just hearing the theme song gave us a thrill, like we were about to witness something totally out of bounds. The sketches, the music, the unpredictability, it all felt electric. Watching SNL made you feel like you were part of a secret club, like you just dipped a toe into the grown-up pool. And that little taste of rebellion? It was unforgettable. If somebody wanted to bully you, they had to do it in person. In the 70s, bullying was a lot more upfront. If someone wanted to pick on you, they had to do it in person. There was no hiding behind a screen, no anonymous posts or cruel comments sent from a distance. If they had something nasty to say, they had to walk up, look you in the eye, and say it to your face. It wasn't easy to deal with, but it was real and immediate. Yeah, the insult still hurt, and the experience could definitely leave a mark. But there was a kind of built-in accountability. There were no secret messages or viral rumors spreading at lightning speed. If someone crossed the line, they did it in front of other people, and that made it harder to pretend it didn't happen, or to escape the fallout. It didn't make bullying okay, but it did make it more visible. You knew who was causing the trouble, and so did everyone else. What's the wildest outfit you ever wore in the 70s? Bonus points if polyester was involved. We had both Sesame Street and The Muppet Show. Sesame Street had already changed the game when it came to kids' TV. It wasn't just fun, it was smart. With lovable characters like Grover, Ernie, Bert, and Big Bird leading the way, we were learning numbers, letters, and life lessons without even realizing it. The songs stuck in your head and the skits made you laugh, but behind all that fun was real education wrapped in silliness. Then along came The Muppet Show, and things got a little wilder. While Sesame Street spoke to the younger crowd, The Muppet Show brought in a bit more of that grown-up humor. Still goofy, but with a wink. Kermit the Frog became a full-blown star. He wasn't just the face of a kids' show anymore, he was sharing the stage with the likes of Steve Martin and Diana Ross. Kermit wasn't just for kids, he became a household name. He brought generations together with a mix of charm and chaos that felt fresh and fun. Both shows proved you could entertain and educate at the same time, and make it all feel effortless. Nobody was cooler than the Fonz. Happy Days gave us one of the most unforgettable icons of the decade, the Fonz. Played by Henry Winkler, Fonzie wasn't just cool, he defined cool. With his leather jacket, perfect hair, and that legendary "aye," he had a kind of effortless swagger that kids wanted to copy and adults couldn't help but admire. You couldn't teach that kind of confidence, it just poured out of him. But Fonzie's coolness wasn't only about how he looked or what he said. It was the way he carried himself. He didn't need to yell or show off to get respect. People just gave it to him. He could make a jukebox play with a tap or settle an argument with a grin, and somehow it never felt forced. He stood up for people, did the right thing, and always kept his cool. He had the charm, the strength, and the magic touch that made everything look easy. Fonzie wasn't just a character, he was a legend. And he made sure we all knew that being cool was about more than just appearances. The clothes were insane. Fashion in the 70s was a wild ride, and we were all along for it. Sure, when we flipped through those old photo albums, we might wince at some of the outfits. But deep down, we kind of love how bold and unapologetic it all was. Whether you were a teen or a grown-up, chances are you owned a wide-collared shirt, a pair of bell-bottoms, and something covered in a trippy, psychedelic print. Bell-bottoms had this groovy swing to them, making everyone look like they were ready to hit the disco, or just strut down the sidewalk like a runway. And polyester? It was everywhere. Bright colors, loud patterns, and fabrics that didn't breathe but sure made a statement. Then there were the platform shoes. We were all a few inches taller and probably a little clumsier, thanks to those chunky heels that gave your calves a workout just walking around. The 70s weren't about playing it safe. Fashion was loud, weird, and full of personality. And that's exactly what made it so unforgettable. It was a decade where being a little outrageous was the whole point, and honestly, we loved every minute of it. Everyone worshipped that Farrah Fawcett poster. In the 70s, if there was one thing almost every kid wanted on their bedroom wall, it was Farrah Fawcett's famous red swimsuit poster. Think of it like the viral moment of the decade. Something so huge everyone had to be part of it. You'd spot it everywhere, and having it meant you were tuned in, that you had a sense of style and understood grown-up cool in a way others didn't. Farrah's bright smile, those feathered locks, and that one-piece suit turned her into the ultimate icon. But this poster wasn't just about looks, it stood for something bigger. It was a kind of badge, a way of saying, I'm connected, I'm with it. Sure, people admired her beauty, but hanging that poster up was more than that. Nothing was more joyously terrifying than Jaws. In the summer of 1975, Jaws didn't just scare us, it changed the way we looked at water. Steven Spielberg's masterpiece didn't need non-stop shark action or fancy effects to get under our skin. In fact, we barely saw the shark until the very end. That's what made it so powerful. It was all in our heads. The music, the tension, the slow build-up. It tapped right into our deepest fears without showing much at all. Suddenly, the ocean wasn't the only place to be afraid of. After Jaws, any body of water felt suspicious. Lakes, pools, even your own bathtub started to seem like dangerous territory. You'd be swimming along, minding your business, and then, bam! That creepy feeling would hit. You'd swear something was coming up behind you. The movie planted that fear so deeply that a whole generation couldn't go near water without thinking twice. And all it took was a few notes of music and a shadow in the deep. The 70s gave us more than memories. They gave us a sense of freedom, fun, and fearless creativity. From Shag carpets to Saturday cartoons, every moment felt like an adventure. It was a time when simple joys ruled and being a kid meant living fully in the moment. And honestly, we wouldn't trade it for anything. Illegal now, but normal in 1970s. Think your childhood was wild? Wait until you hear what kids got away with in the 1970s. From buying smokes at the corner store to dodging lawn darts in the backyard, everyday life was packed with risks that would be banned today. Buckle up. We're diving into the shocking things that were totally normal, but are now totally illegal. Red dye number 2. In the 1970s, a big health scare swept across the country over something most folks had never given a second thought: food coloring. The spotlight was on red dye number 2 after studies at the time suggested it might be linked to serious health problems. That news spread fast and stirred up a lot of fear. The public outcry got so loud that by 1976, the US government stepped in and officially banned red dye number 2 from all food products. Now here's the twist. Mars, the company that makes M&Ms, never actually used red dye number 2 inches in their red candies. They'd always used red number 40, a totally different dye that wasn't part of the controversy. But the fear around red dyes in general had already taken hold. People were spooked, and Mars didn't want to take any chances. So, in a move that surprised everyone, they stopped making red M&Ms in 1976. Not because they had to, but to keep their customers from worrying. For the next 11 years, red M&Ms were gone. Fans had to make do with the other colors until 1987, when the red ones finally returned. By that time, food dyes had been studied more closely, and red number 40 was declared safe to eat. This whole episode shows just how powerful public opinion can be. Even when the facts say one thing, fear and perception can still drive big changes in what we see on store shelves. Clackers. If you were a kid growing up in the 1970s, there's a good chance you remember Clackers. Those loud, flashy toys that were as risky as they were fun. They were made from two solid acrylic balls strung together with a sturdy cord. The idea was simple. Swing the balls up and down so they smacked into each other with a sharp clack. The quicker you moved, the louder the noise and the trickier it got to keep them going. It looked cool, it sounded cool, but it also came with a pretty big risk. The problem was, if you lost your rhythm, those hard plastic balls could fly up and nail you right in the face. Worse still, some of them shattered under the force, sending sharp plastic shards flying. It didn't take long before schools and parents started to see the danger. Reports of eye injuries and bruises piled up, and clackers got banned from playgrounds all across the country. Of course, once something gets banned, it only becomes more tempting. Kids found ways to sneak them into school and show off to their friends, seeing who could keep their clackers going the longest without getting hurt. Eventually, toy makers had to change the design, swapping in softer materials to make them safer. But for those who lived through it, the original clackers still stand out as one of the wildest and most unforgettable parts of 70s childhood. Drinking age of 18. Back in the 1970s, turning 18 came with a whole lot of responsibility and freedom. You could vote, get drafted into the military, and in many states, you could legally order a drink. The movement to lower the drinking age really picked up steam after the 26th Amendment was passed in 1971, dropping the voting age from 21 to 18. The idea was straightforward. If you were old enough to cast a ballot and risk your life in war, then you were old enough to handle a beer. That reasoning made sense to a lot of people back then, and by the middle of the decade, most states had lowered the legal drinking age to somewhere between 18 and 20. But that shift had serious consequences. Drunk driving accidents climbed fast, especially among teens and young adults. Studies showed alcohol was involved in more than 60% of traffic deaths, with a large number of those crashes involving drivers aged 16 to 20. With the numbers getting worse, lawmakers knew something had to be done. In 1984, Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, which didn't force states directly, but made them an offer they couldn't refuse. If a state didn't raise its drinking age back to 21, it would lose federal highway funds. That did the trick. By 1988, every state had raised the age. It might seem hard to picture now, but during the 1970s, grabbing a beer at 18 wasn't just legal, it was completely normal. Which of these 70s memories do you remember most clearly, and did you ever get hurt playing with one of these toys? Playing on railroad tracks. Back in the 70s, lots of kids thought railroad tracks were just another place to play and explore. It felt like a built-in playground. They'd walk along the rails like a balance beam, race across train yards to save time, and treat it all like one big adventure. Some even laid pennies on the track, just to watch trains flatten them. Most kids, and even some adults, didn't really think about how dangerous that could be. Back then, there weren't many rules, and people didn't treat the tracks as off-limits. But that carefree attitude wouldn't fly today. Things have changed a lot. Now, railroad companies enforce tough trespassing laws, and safety groups run constant campaigns to warn folks just how deadly it can be. Today's trains are faster, quieter, and take way longer to stop. A train can be right on top of you before you even hear it coming. That's why groups like Operation Lifesaver work hard to teach everyone, especially kids, about how risky tracks really are. What used to seem like harmless fun is now seen as a serious safety issue. And if you're caught on or near the tracks now, it's not just dangerous. It could also land you with a big fine or even legal trouble. Flame retardants in the 70s. Back in the 1970s, flame retardants were used just about everywhere. You'd find them in pajamas, couches, mattresses, and even baby clothes. At the time, it felt like the right call. Fire safety was a big concern, especially for children, and adding these chemicals seemed like a smart way to protect families. But here's what no one really understood back then. Those chemicals didn't just sit on the surface. They could seep through the skin and slowly build up in the body over time. As more research came out over the years, scientists started to connect the dots. These flame retardant chemicals weren't as harmless as folks once thought. They were linked to serious health issues, things like hormone imbalances, learning problems, and even cancer. The more people learned, the louder the calls for regulation became. By the 2000s, the government finally stepped in. Many of these chemicals were banned or heavily restricted, but the truth is the harm had already been done. Tons of older furniture and clothing from the 70s and 80s are still loaded with these substances. So if you've got a vintage sofa or a set of old-school pajamas lying around, there's a good chance you're still coming into contact with those same harmful chemicals, long after they were pulled from store shelves. Lead paint. In the 1970s, lead-based paint was everywhere, just as common in homes as shag rugs and wood-paneled walls. It was the go-to choice for painting walls, windows, furniture, and even cribs and toys. People loved it because it was bright, tough, and stuck around for years without peeling. On the surface, it seemed like a smart, reliable option, but underneath that glossy finish was a danger no one really talked about until it was too late. As more studies came out, the dangers of lead exposure started making headlines. Kids were especially at risk. Just breathing in lead dust or touching peeling paint could lead to serious health issues, things like developmental problems, trouble learning, and even damage to organs. Once the risk became clear, the US government stepped in. In 1978, they officially banned lead-based paint for use in homes. But by then, the damage had been done. Millions of houses, apartments, and schools were already coated in it, and many of those buildings still stand today. Even now, if you're fixing up an old house, you've got to be careful. Scraping or sanding old paint can send toxic lead dust into the air. It's wild to think that something so common for so long was actually making people sick. The story of lead paint is a harsh lesson. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it's safe. Cyclamates. Back in the 1960s, Cyclamates were the sweet secret behind just about every diet product on the shelf. These artificial sweeteners popped up in everything from sodas to low-calorie desserts and even some processed foods. They were about 30 times sweeter than regular sugar and had 0 calories, making them perfect for anyone trying to cut back on sugar. One of the most popular diet drinks of the time, Tab, owed its unique flavor to Cyclamates. But in 1969, the sweet ride came to a sudden halt. That year, a study raised serious concerns. Lab rats given extremely high doses of Cyclamates developed bladder tumors, and that sparked fears about cancer risk in humans. The news spread fast and the public got nervous. The US government didn't wait around. Cyclamates were pulled from the shelves in 1969, and the official ban took effect in 1970. Food companies scrambled to adjust, switching to saccharin, another sugar substitute that would later face its own share of safety debates. Interestingly, while the US stuck to the ban, many countries didn't. Cyclamates are still used today in places like Europe and Canada, and as time went on, newer studies questioned whether the original cancer link was ever truly valid. Still, the US never lifted the ban, leaving Cyclamates behind as a forgotten piece of American food history, one that reminds us how quickly public health concerns can reshape what we eat and drink. Cigarette advertising on TV. Back in the 1970s, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing cigarette ads. They were on your TV and magazines, stretched across billboards, everywhere. These ads didn't just show people smoking, they turned it into a lifestyle. Cool cowboys, glamorous women, and charming celebrities made it look like lighting up was the key to confidence, freedom, and style. Names like the Marlboro Man and Joe Camel weren't just ad characters, they became icons. And those catchy slogans? People remembered them for years, but as the health risks of smoking became harder to ignore, the government stepped in. In 1971, cigarette ads were officially banned from television and radio. That was a big deal, a turning point in the way tobacco could be marketed. Still, the tobacco companies didn't throw in the towel, they shifted gears. Instead of TV spots, they focused on print ads, splashing their logos across magazines, race cars, and sports arenas. They even made sure their products popped up in Hollywood films, keeping cigarettes front and center in popular culture. So, while the ad ban took them off the airwaves, cigarettes still held onto a strong presence. It took years and a lot more rules before tighter restrictions really started cutting into the influence of big tobacco. Child labor. In the 1970s, seeing kids with jobs wasn't out of the ordinary at all. It was especially common in farming communities, family-run businesses, or homes where money was tight. A lot of parents back then felt that working young wasn't just helpful, it was important. It taught kids how to be responsible, how to handle money, and how to grow up with a strong work ethic. Delivering newspapers before sunrise, helping out on the farm, or doing shifts at a corner store, all of that was seen as part of growing up. But in many cases, kids were putting in long, tough hours, sometimes missing out on school just to help make ends meet. Even though the Fair Labor Standards Act had been around since 1938, the rules about child labor weren't all that strict, especially when it came to agriculture. Under certain conditions, it was still legal for children to work, even in dangerous environments. That meant kids were sometimes using heavy equipment, working around chemicals, or doing hard labor for hours on end. As more people started to speak out, lawmakers began to take notice. In 1976, the Child Labor Amendment was introduced to push for stronger protections, but it didn't bring much change right away. The real shift started in 1989, when the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. That marked a turning point, putting the focus back on education instead of early employment. Over time, the U.S. strengthened the rules under the FLSA, eventually making it illegal for children to work in dangerous or harmful conditions. Leaded gasoline. Back in the 1970s, a visit to the gas station was a lot simpler, but also a lot more dangerous than most people knew. You didn't choose between leaded and unleaded. Almost every pump offered leaded gasoline. It had been the standard for decades. Drivers liked it because it kept engines running smoothly and reduced knocking, and car makers designed engines to rely on it. It seemed like a win all around, until scientists started sounding the alarm. What nobody realized at first was that burning leaded fuel was filling the air with toxic lead particles. And this wasn't just an environmental issue, it was a serious health threat. Children were hit the hardest. Research started linking lead exposure to developmental delays, lower IQs, and even long-term brain damage. The more studies that came out, the harder it became to ignore the problem. By the mid-1970s, the government stepped in. They ordered a slow phase-out of leaded gasoline, aiming to protect public health without disrupting the auto industry overnight. Still, plenty of people were skeptical. Drivers worried that unleaded fuel would mess up their engines, and switching habits wasn't easy. But the phase-out continued, and by the 1990s, leaded gas was nearly gone. It marked the end of an era, and a major win for public health. Drunk driving with high BAC limits. Back in the 1970s, drinking and driving wasn't just common. It was almost expected in some circles. The legal blood alcohol limits were much higher than they are now, with many states allowing drivers to be on the road with a BAC of 0.10% or more. That's noticeably above today's national limit of 0.08%. And even if someone was clearly drunk, law enforcement often looked the other way. In a lot of places, an officer might just give a quick warning or tell the driver to be careful getting home. It wasn't just casual nights out either. People left bars, parties, and even office happy hours thinking nothing of hopping behind the wheel after several drinks. The attitude was casual, and many truly believed they were fine to drive, as long as they felt okay. There was little shame or stigma, and few people considered drunk driving a serious issue. But things started to change as more tragic stories came to light. A major shift happened in 1980 when Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, was founded by a mother who lost her child to a drunk driver. That group helped spark a national movement. Through tireless advocacy, they pushed for tougher laws, public education, and more consistent enforcement. By the mid-1980s, most states had lowered their legal limits to 0.08%, and society began to treat drunk driving as a dangerous crime, not just a poor decision. Smoking on airplanes. Flying in the 1970s felt like stepping into a whole different world. As soon as you boarded, you'd see flight attendants dressed to impress. And almost immediately, you'd notice the thick cloud of cigarette smoke hanging in the air. Planes had smoking and non-smoking sections, but honestly, that didn't matter much. The smoke didn't stay put. It floated through the entire cabin, so whether you lit up or not, you were stuck breathing it the whole way. Back then, no one thought twice about it. Lighting up mid-flight was just something passengers did. Ashtrays were built right into the armrests, and smoke blended with the smells of jet fuel and whatever meal they happened to be serving. It was all part of the flying experience. But over time, people started speaking up. The risks of secondhand smoke became harder to ignore, and health experts pushed for change. The first big shift came in 1988 when smoking was banned on short domestic flights in the US. That was just the beginning. Over the next 10 years, more rules followed, and by the time 2000 rolled around, the ban was total. No more smoking on any US flights, period. Do you think kids today are missing out? Or are we better off with the safety rules we have now? Why? Lawn darts. In the 1970s, lawn darts were just part of the fun in almost every backyard. Families would gather for barbecues or summer get-togethers, and someone would pull out the lawn darts. The goal was simple: toss the big metal darts into a ring on the grass, kind of like horseshoes, but with more airtime. It all seemed harmless enough, but those darts weren't made of soft plastic. They had long, sharp metal tips, and enough weight to drive straight into the ground. Or worse, into someone. The problem was, these darts didn't always land where they were supposed to. A bad throw, a sudden gust of wind, or a curious kid walking into the line of fire could lead to serious injuries. Over the years, hospitals started seeing more and more accidents, some of them deadly. Still, the game stayed popular, and many parents didn't realize just how dangerous it really was. After enough warnings and tragic stories, the government stepped in. By the late 1980s, lawn darts were officially banned in the US. A safer version with soft tips came later, but it never quite had the same edge. For those who grew up with the original version, part of the excitement wasn't just aiming at the target, it was hoping you didn't get hit. Looking back now, it's hard to believe something that risky was once a regular part of summer play. Minimal child car seat regulations. Back in the 1970s, child car seat laws were barely a blip on the radar. Most parents didn't use them, and when they did, it wasn't for safety. It was more about keeping the child in place or giving them a better view out the window. It wasn't unusual to see kids sprawled out on the back seat, standing up while the car was moving, or even riding in the front seat without a seatbelt. Babies were often held in someone's arms, with parents believing their own grip was strong enough to keep them safe if anything went wrong. Sure, car seats existed, but they weren't designed for crash protection. They were mostly boosters meant to prop kids up so they could see better during the ride. There were no real safety standards, no crash tests, and most people didn't think twice about skipping them altogether. That mindset finally started to shift after a pivotal 1985 study from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. It revealed something shocking. Car accidents were the leading cause of death for children aged 1 to 4. That wake-up call changed everything. Now, every state has laws that require child safety seats, and we've come a long way. Modern car seats, when used correctly, reduce fatal injuries by 54% for toddlers and an incredible 71% for infants. It's hard to believe that something so crucial was once seen as optional. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment 1 to let us know you're still following. Lax seatbelt laws. In the 1970s, wearing a seatbelt was more of a suggestion than a rule. A lot of cars, especially older ones, didn't even have belts in the back seats, and when they did, most people didn't bother using them. It wasn't unusual to see kids climbing around the car, sitting on armrests, or even standing in the back while the car cruised down the highway. Buckling up just wasn't something people thought much about. Back then, many drivers believed seatbelts were uncomfortable or even risky. Some folks thought they'd get trapped in a wreck if they were strapped in, That mindset stuck around for a while, and even as safety experts pushed for change, plenty of people just weren't convinced. Campaigns tried to raise awareness, but usage stayed low. It wasn't until 1984 that real change began, when New York passed the first mandatory seatbelt law. A lot of folks didn't like it at first, but slowly, other states followed. By the 1990s, seatbelt laws had spread across the country. These days, we know better. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says seatbelts cut the risk of dying by 45% in the front seat and up to 60% in the back. It's wild to think there was ever a time when something so simple and so effective was optional. Candy cigarettes. Back in the 1970s, candy cigarettes were a regular sight in every kid's candy stash. You could find them at every corner store. Those slim, white sugar sticks wrapped in paper, often with a little red tip to look like they were lit. Some even had a clever trick built in, a small puff of powdered sugar that would blow out when you exhaled, mimicking real smoke. For kids, it was all about playing grown-up, copying how adults held them, tapped them, and pretended to take a drag. At the time, no one really raised an eyebrow. Smoking was just a part of everyday life. You saw it on TV shows and restaurants, at the movies, even on airplanes. So it didn't seem odd that kids would want to imitate what they saw all around them. Parents rarely thought twice about tossing a pack of candy cigarettes into the shopping cart. But as the health dangers of smoking became clearer, those sweet little sticks didn't seem so harmless. Critics pointed out that giving kids candy made to look like cigarettes could make smoking feel normal, maybe even cool. Slowly, opinions started to shift. By the late 20th century, rules tightened. Some countries banned them outright, while others changed the name and look, rebranding them as candy sticks with no cigarette styling at all. Today, it's almost unthinkable to market candy that mimics smoking. But for kids growing up in the 70s, candy cigarettes were just one more fun treat from the corner store. Selling unpasteurized milk. In the 1970s, raw milk was easy to come by and popular with folks who believed in its natural health benefits. Many swore by its rich, creamy taste and claimed it was better for digestion and overall wellness. Small farms and local dairies often sold it straight to consumers, usually with little to no oversight. Buying raw milk fresh from the farm was a regular part of life in rural areas, and even in some cities. But as time went on, serious health concerns started to emerge. Scientists and doctors began connecting unpasteurized milk to dangerous bacteria like Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria. People were getting sick, and some of the infections turned out to be severe. By the early 1980s, public health officials were raising red flags and warning people about the risks of drinking raw milk. Things took a major turn in 1987 when the FDA stepped in. They made pasteurization mandatory for all milk sold across state lines. Not long after, individual states began passing their own rules, some allowing raw milk sales with strict conditions, others banning it completely. Today, raw milk is still a hot topic. Supporters argue it's healthier and more natural, while health experts warn about the risks. Either way, the days of buying it freely like folks did in the 70s are long gone. Minimal airline security. In the 1970s, flying felt casual, almost carefree. There were no TSA checkpoints, no full-body scanners, and no need to take off your shoes or toss out your shampoo. You could stroll right up to the gate with your family, and there were no restrictions on who could see you off or welcome you when you landed. Cockpit doors? They stayed open during flights, and no one thought much of it. But that laid-back approach came with serious risks. Hijackings became alarmingly frequent, especially in the early 70s. In 1972 alone, there were more than 200 hijacking incidents worldwide. Some were political stunts, others were about money, but either way, the danger was real. Still, the response was slow. It would take years before security procedures saw real change. Everything shifted after the tragedy of September 11th, 2001. That day marked a turning point in how the world looked at air travel. the U.S. government passed the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, creating the TSA and rolling out tough new rules. From reinforced cockpit doors to detailed baggage checks and stricter passenger screenings, flying would never be the same again. What was once a relaxed routine became one of the most heavily guarded parts of modern life: owning exotic pets without permits. Back in the 1970s, owning exotic pets wasn't all that unusual, and it definitely wasn't tightly controlled. You could walk into a local pet store and come out with an iguana, a colorful macaw, or even a boa constrictor. No questions asked. In some places, people even kept monkeys or wildcats as household pets. There were hardly any rules, and little thought was given to long-term care, safety, or the impact on the animals themselves. But as more people started bringing exotic creatures into their homes, problems quickly surfaced. Some of these animals escaped or were abandoned, creating dangers for local ecosystems. Others injured their owners or neighbors. These weren't just house pets, they were wild animals, and it became clear that things were getting out of hand. In 1980, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service stepped in and started setting rules to slow the trade and protect both animals and people. By the time the late 90s and early 2000s rolled around, most states had passed laws requiring permits, ownership papers, and clear standards for how these animals should be cared for. Still, enforcement was tricky. A 2013 report from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums estimated that over 50,000 exotic pets were being kept without proper permits at the time. It's wild to think that just a few decades earlier you could casually pick up a snake or a monkey like it was no big deal. If you like this video, be sure to check out the rest of the series for more nostalgia-packed moments. Don't forget to subscribe and share Past Not Past with a fellow 70s kid, or someone who wishes they were one. Thanks so much for watching. We're glad you're here.